At 11:37 a.m. on February 20th, 1944, First Lieutenant William Loi sat in the left seat of a B-17 Flying Fortress, climbing through 12,000 feet over the English Channel, watching the instrument needles settle into place on an aircraft that had never been to war before today. He was 23 years old. This was his 9th combat mission. If he made it home, it would be his 10th. Ahead of them, somewhere beyond the gray haze over the continent, Leipzig waited. German controllers were already vectoring interceptors. Intelligence estimated 20 Messerschmitt Bf-109s airborne and climbing to meet the bomber stream. This was Operation Argument, Big Week, the opening blow of the largest coordinated bomber offensive in history. More than 1,000 American heavy bombers were crossing into Germany, aimed directly at the heart of the Luftwaffe's fighter production. The target was the Messerschmitt aircraft factories at Leipzig. If those factories stayed operational, the coming invasion of Europe would fail before it ever reached the beaches. Loi's aircraft was brand new, built by Douglas Aircraft in Long Beach in December. Serial number 42 to 38,109. The crew had named her Cabin in the Sky. She arrived at RAF Charleston just 10 days earlier. This was her first mission. The 305th Bomb Group had already lost 21 B-17s in the last 3 months alone. Most crews never survived their first 5 missions. Once a bomber slipped out of formation, damaged, slowed, smoking, German fighters swarmed it within minutes. Average survival time after losing an engine was 4 minutes. Loi had joined the 364th Squadron in November. Since then, he had watched 11 B-17s go down, 88 men. Some parachutes opened. Most did not. The pattern never changed. The Germans attacked from 12 o'clock high, head-on. 20mm cannon fire tore into the bomber's nose. The B-17 could absorb punishment from the sides. It could not survive that. Lieutenant Paul Murphy, the co-pilot, sat beside Loi in the right seat. 24 years old. 12 missions. In January, Murphy had been shot down over France. He spent 8 days moving with the resistance before slipping back to England. He never talked about it. Behind them, Staff Sergeant Thomas Dempsey monitored the radio. Below, Technical Sergeant Joseph Kubarek settled into the ball turret. Staff Sergeant Carol Rowley manned the top turret. Waist gunners Sergeant Ralph Braswell and another crewman checked their belts. Sergeant Alfred Went covered the tail. Lieutenant Harry Seraphine navigated. Lieutenant Harry Mason lay prone in the nose at the bombardier's station. 10 men. For 1,000 pounds of bombs. 3 hours to the target. The RAF had hit Leipzig the night before. 700 bombers, 78 lost. Fires still burned in the residential districts. Now the Americans would try daylight precision bombing. The theory said tight formations and 13.50 caliber machine guns per aircraft would protect them. Reality said otherwise. Leipzig lay 500 miles inside Germany. The P-47 Thunderbolts could escort them only to the border. The new P-51 Mustangs had the range, but there weren't enough yet. After that, the bombers were on their own. Loi checked the engine gauges. 4 Wright Cyclone engines, 1,800 horsepower each. Fuel flow steady. Oil pressure normal. Manifold pressure where it should be. Cabin in the Sky held position in the low squadron, 3rd aircraft from the left. The intelligence briefing had been blunt. Expect heavy fighter opposition. The Luftwaffe had reorganized its day fighter units specifically to kill American bombers. JG-300, JG-301, JG-302. Their tactics were evolving. More aggressive. More coordinated. The bomber stream stretched for miles, contrails marking the sky like chalk lines. Every German radar station from the coast to Berlin was tracking them. Every fighter squadron was scrambling. Loi had flown Brunswick, Wilhelmshaven, Frankfurt, Ostersleben. Each mission harder than the last. Flak thicker. Fighters smarter. Losses heavier. February had been brutal. Now the weather had cleared. Now they were flying every day. Now they were pushing deep. This was supposed to be the offensive that broke the Luftwaffe. If it failed, the invasion would be a massacre. Cabin in the Sky crossed the German coast at 11:53. 3 hours and 17 minutes until they would know if she would ever fly home. At 14:21, the formation reached the initial point. The turn onto the bomb run. The 305th Bomb Group led the 1st Bombardment Division, 36 B-17s, tight and level. Loi's aircraft flew position 7. Leipzig appeared through the haze, an industrial city of 500,000 people. 3 Messerschmitt plants, Heidelberg, Oskatz, Machau. Flak started at 1424. German 88mm guns, bursts blooming at 23,000 feet. Black clouds of steel. The formation flew straight through it. No evasive action. The Norden bombsight demanded steady flight. The aircraft shuddered as fragments rattled against the fuselage. Engine 3 surged, then steadied. The bomb bay doors opened at 1426. 8 500-pound general-purpose bombs. Release at 1428. The aircraft jumped as 4 tons dropped away. Loi banked left with the formation, turning for home. Then the fighters came. At 1431, they hit from 12 o'clock high. 20 Bf-109G, 6S, diving head-on. The Germans opened fire at 800 yards. The sky filled with tracers. 1 Messerschmitt came straight at cabin in the sky. Mason fired from the nose. Rowley swung the top turret forward. The fighter did not break. The first 20mm shell struck the cockpit at 14:31 and 17 seconds. It came through the windshield between Loi and Murphy and exploded inside. Murphy was killed instantly. His body slumped forward onto the control column. The aircraft pitched down. The second shell smashed the instrument panel. Fragments tore through Loi's face. Blood flooded his eyes. The third shell hit engine number 2. Flames erupted from the cowling, streaming back along the wing. More shells hammered into the fuselage. Men screamed over the intercom. 8 wounded. 1 dead. Cabin in the sky was diving, falling out of formation 300 miles inside Germany. Murphy's weight forced the controls forward. Loi grabbed the yoke. Blood made it slick. His right arm didn't respond. Shrapnel had torn through muscle and nerve. He reached across with his left hand and pulled. The aircraft kept falling, and the sky above Leipzig closed in. Murphy's weight was too much. Loi couldn't overcome it with one hand. The airspeed needle climbed, 250, 270, 290 miles per hour. The wings began to shudder, the entire airframe vibrating under stresses it was never meant to endure. The B-17 was strong, but not invincible. Not in a power dive with a dead pilot slumped forward on the controls. Loi braced his boots against the instrument panel. He wrapped his left arm around Murphy's chest and pulled. The body was dead weight, 170 pounds, limp and uncooperative. Loi dragged him backward inch by inch, muscles screaming, vision narrowing. Finally, Murphy slid clear of the control column and slumped against the right side of the cockpit. Loi grabbed the yoke with his left hand and hauled back. The aircraft resisted at first. Then, slowly, the nose came up. 13,000 feet, 12,000, 11,500. The dive flattened out. The wings groaned, but held. At 11,000 feet, cabin in the sky leveled off, alone, 5 miles behind the formation, burning, and deep inside Germany. And the fighters were coming back. The number 2 engine was fully ablaze now. Flames stretched 20 feet behind the wing, licking toward the inboard fuel tanks. 1,700 gallons of high-octane aviation fuel. If the fire reached them, the wing would explode. Loi reached for the feathering switch with his left hand. Nothing. The propeller kept windmilling, feeding air into the fire. He triggered the fire extinguishing system. The carbon dioxide bottles discharged. The gauge dropped. The flames didn't stop. Damage reports flooded the intercom. Dempsey in the radio room. Shrapnel in both legs, unable to stand. Braswell hit in the shoulder and side. The other waist gunner wounded in the arm. Kubarek in the ball turret, fragments in his back. Rowley in the top turret, ribs torn by steel. One in the tail, hydraulic fluid spraying everywhere. Mason scrambled up from the nose. He took one look at Murphy, dead in the right seat, blood everywhere, and at Loi flying one-handed, face drenched in blood, instruments smeared red. Mason grabbed the first aid kit and went to work on Loi's wounds as best he could. At 1434, the Messerschmitts returned. For Bf-109s, coming in from 8 o'clock high. They could see it clearly now, a lone fortress, burning, falling behind, crippled. Went open fire from the tail. Tracers streaked past the fighters. The other gunners joined in. Everyone who could still man a gun. The Germans made 2 fast passes, cannon shells raking the fuselage, punching more holes through aluminum skin and plexiglass. Then they broke off. Why, Loi never knew. Low ammunition, low fuel, or maybe they simply assumed the bomber would crash on its own. The fighters peeled away east. Cabin in the sky was alone again. 3 engines, 11,000 feet, burning. Airspeed 130 miles per hour. Compass roughly west-northwest. Half the instrument panel was unreadable under blood. Loi wiped it away with his sleeve. The blood ran back immediately. Mason finished bandaging his face. The cuts weren't deep, but head wounds bled endlessly. Loi could see again, poorly, but enough. His right arm hung useless. The fire still raged on number 2. Feathering still failed. Loi throttled back the remaining engines, reducing airflow across the burning propeller. The flames shortened slightly, not gone, but contained. Hydraulic pressure dropped to 0. The system was dry, lines severed in the tail. That meant no brakes, no normal landing gear extension, no powered turret rotation. Flight controls still worked, cable-driven, but everything felt heavy and unresponsive. Loi called for a full damage assessment. The reports came back grim. Radio mostly dead. Ball turret jammed. Top and tail turrets still functional. Oxygen system damaged. 1 generator out, running on batteries. Fuel transfer unreliable. Bomb bay doors stuck open. 8 men wounded. They were 300 miles inside Germany, 200 to the coast, then the North Sea, then England, flying at 125 miles per hour, losing altitude slowly, on fire. If the fire reached the fuel tanks, they had minutes. At 1441, Loi made the call. He told the crew to prepare to bail out. The aircraft was too damaged, too dangerous. Everyone was to get parachutes, move to the exits, and wait for his command. Men began helping the wounded toward the hatches. Then Braswell came forward from the waist. He had checked the worst casualties. Dempsey couldn't jump, both legs torn apart. He would bleed out before reaching the ground. Kubarek was worse, shrapnel deep in his back, pinned in the ball turret, unable to climb out. 2 men who could not bail out. If the rest of the crew jumped, those 2 would die when the bomber went in. Loi looked at the burning engine, looked at the instruments, looked at Murphy's body beside him. Then he made his second decision. He was staying with the aircraft. He would try to fly it home. Anyone else could jump if they wanted. No one did. Every man stayed. Mason slid fully into the co-pilot's seat. He had never flown a B-17, never trained on the controls, but he could reach switches, manage throttles, adjust mixtures. Loi flew with his left hand. Mason followed instructions. They tried to climb. 10, 500, 11,000 feet. The fire flared brighter. Loi backed off, leveled at 11,200 feet. Navigator Seraphine came forward and gave a heading, 285 degrees, west-northwest toward the coast. Fuel was critical. They were running on auxiliary tanks. The transfer pumps might fail at any moment. Mason called out numbers. Tank 1, 300 gallons. Tank 3, 280. Tank 4, 320. Tank 2 gone. At 1453, hydraulic pressure hit 0 completely. At 1458, the last generator failed. They were on batteries now. Maybe an hour. Maybe less. Loi's left arm cramped from constant pressure on the yoke. His left leg shook holding rudder against asymmetric thrust. His vision blurred again. Shock was setting in. Then, at 1507, the fire went out. Just died. The flames vanished from number 2. Loi never knew why. Fuel exhaustion, structural failure, or sheer luck. But for the first time since Leipzig, cabin in the sky was no longer burning. And the crew had a chance. The flames were gone. The number 2 engine still windmilled, its propeller locked in the airstream, dragging like an anchor, but the fire had burned itself out. No more orange flame. No more immediate threat of the wing detonating. For the first time since Leipzig, cabin in the sky wasn't actively trying to kill its own crew. Navigator Seraphine gave a quick estimate. They were clear of Leipzig's heavy defenses now, somewhere over western Germany, likely near Kassel. Roughly 180 miles to the coast. Another hour and a half if nothing else went wrong. Something went wrong at 1514. The number 4 engine, outboard right, began losing oil pressure. The needle slid downward. 60 pounds. 40, 30, 20. Oil temperature climbed. A bearing was failing, or an oil line had been hit earlier by flak or cannon fragments. The cause didn't matter. The result did. If the engine seized, the propeller would stop. A stopped propeller created more drag than a windmilling one. With number 2 already dead, that would leave 2 engines on the left side only. The asymmetric thrust would be brutal. Loi pulled power back on number 4. Watch the gauges. The pressure stabilized at 15 pounds, dangerously low, but holding. The temperature steadied. He left it there. Minimum power. Just enough to keep it alive. Now they were flying with 2 engines at working power. 1 engine barely turning. 1 engine dead and windmilling. Airspeed dropped to 115 miles per hour. Altitude began bleeding away, slowly, relentlessly. 11,000 feet. 10,900. 10,800. The bomber formation was long gone. Somewhere ahead over the North Sea, protected by fighters, intact. Cabin in the sky was alone over Germany, crippled, descending, visible to every radar operator and fighter controller still awake. Mason asked if they should try calling for escort. Loi shook his head. The radio barely worked. And even if it didn't, no fighter group was coming this far inland for a single damaged bomber. They were on their own. At 1522, Loi's head dropped forward. His grip loosened on the control column. The aircraft rolled right and nose down. Altitude unwound fast, 9,000 feet. 8,500, speed building again. Mason reacted instantly. He grabbed the co-pilot's yoke and hauled back. He had no training, no muscle memory, only instinct. The bomber responded sluggishly, but enough. The wings leveled. The dive flattened at 7,800 feet. Mason couldn't hold it. He didn't know how to compensate for the dead engine, the wrong trim, the missing hydraulics. The aircraft began rolling again. He shook Loi hard, slapped his face, shouted his name. Loi's eyes fluttered open, confused, dazed. Then his left hand found the yoke. He took control. The aircraft steadied. For the next 10 minutes, they flew in silence. Loi fought to stay conscious. Mason watched him like a hawk, ready to grab the controls again if the pilot faded. Behind them, the crew tended the wounded. Dempsey slipped deeper into shock. Kuberecht still couldn't move. The others threw out everything they could, empty ammo cans, oxygen bottles, loose equipment, anything to reduce weight. At 1538, clouds appeared ahead. A solid overcast layer at 8,000 feet, stretching horizon to horizon. No way around it. No altitude to climb above it. They entered the clouds at 7,200 feet. Everything went gray. No horizon. No ground reference. Just instruments. Loi stared at the artificial horizon, the one reliable truth left. Turbulence hit inside the cloud layer. The bomber bucked and rolled. Loi corrected, overcorrected, fighting controls he could barely feel. His left arm trembled. His leg cramped on the rudder pedal. Everything felt numb, distant. They broke out at 1547, down to 6,000 feet. They'd lost over 1,000 feet without realizing it. Seraphine moved forward again. New fix. They were 40 miles from the Dutch border, another 60 to the coast. 100 miles total, maybe 50 minutes if they could hold speed and altitude. At 1551, the number 4 engine quit. No warning. The oil pressure needle dropped to 0 and the propeller froze. The aircraft yet violently right. Loi slammed full left rudder. His leg hit the stop. It wasn't enough. The bomber entered a slow, unstoppable right turn. Mason added power to the left engines. The turn tightened. Reduced power. The aircraft began descending. They were in a spiral. 6,000 feet. 5,800. 5,600. Loi couldn't stop it. 2 engines pulling left. 2 dead engines dragging right. Physics didn't care how badly he wanted it otherwise. The Dutch border passed beneath them at 1554. They were out of Germany, but still occupied territory, still enemy ground. 45 miles to the coast. 5,000 feet. Still turning. Still descending. Loi tried everything. Nothing worked. The bomber wanted to spiral into the ground. Mason noticed the bomb bay doors, still open. 90 minutes of drag. He hit the switch. Nothing. Hydraulics were dead. The doors stayed open. Loi faded again. His head sagged. Mason shook him, shouted, kept him awake. Altitude 4,500 feet. Then Loi did something Mason didn't understand. He reduced power on both remaining engines. Airspeed dropped, 95, 85. The controls went mushy. Authority fading. But the turn rate slowed. The spiral flattened. Loi pulled back, trading speed for altitude, holding the bomber right at the edge of a stall. 75 miles per hour. The aircraft shuddered, right on the limit. The descent slowed to 300 feet per minute. 200. 150. They were still turning, but slower. Controlled. Seraphine called out. 20 miles to the coast. 15 minutes if they could hold it. Loi didn't answer. All of his concentration was on the controls, on staying awake, on keeping the bomber flying. At 16:04, German fighters appeared. 2 Bf-109s. They had been tracking the crippled bomber, waiting for it to crash. Now they came in for the kill. Now they came to finish it. The 2 Bf-109s approached from the port side, climbing into position at 7 o'clock high. Tail gunner called it out immediately, fighters inbound. Loi heard him. There was nothing he could do. He couldn't maneuver, could barely keep the bomber airborne. This fight belonged to the gunners now. The Messerschmitts made their first pass at 16:05, diving from the rear quarter. 20mm cannon shells ripped through the air. Rowley fired from the top turret. Went answered from the tail. Waist gunners joined in. Tracers stitched the sky. The fighters broke off. Came around again. Another pass. More cannon fire. More holes punched into the fuselage. The radio compartment took additional damage. The vertical stabilizer shuddered, but held. No control cables severed. No fuel tank hit. Then, abruptly, the Messerschmitts disengaged. They rolled away and headed east. Loi never knew why. Low ammunition. Low fuel. Or maybe the German pilots decided the bomber was already dead and didn't need further effort. Cabin in the sky kept flying. 3,600 feet. 80 miles per hour. Still turning right. Still losing altitude. The Dutch coast lay 15 miles ahead. Might as well have been 1,000. Loi eased the throttles forward slightly. The left engines responded, and the turn tightened immediately. He pulled power back again. The aircraft told him, clearly, what it would tolerate. This was all it had left. Any more, and it would kill them. 75 miles per hour. 3,400 feet. One full circle every 3 minutes. The math was cruel. 20 miles to the coast at that speed, about 16 minutes. Add the turn and descent, closer to 20. They were losing 100 feet per minute. If nothing failed. If fuel lasted. If Loi stayed conscious. For conditions. Any one failure meant crashing into occupied Holland. At 16:12, the number 3 engine, inboard left, caught fire. Fresh flame. Bright orange. Streaming past the wing. The engine that had carried them the entire way. Something finally failed. Fuel line, oil seal, it didn't matter. Loi hit the fire extinguisher. CO2 discharged. The fire didn't stop. No hydraulics. No way to properly shut off fuel. The propeller kept windmilling, feeding air into the flames. Now they had drag on both sides. One seized propeller on the right, one burning engine on the left. Strangely, the turn slowed slightly. Perverse physics. 3,000 feet. The Dutch coastline came into view, a gray line under haze. Beyond it, the North Sea. Beyond that, England. If they could last. The fire burned brighter. Loi's eyelids drooped. At 16:18, he collapsed. His hand slipped from the controls. The bomber rolled right and began to dive. Mason caught him, grabbed the yoke, hauled back. The aircraft leveled at 2,800 feet. Mason couldn't fly it. Didn't know how to compensate for the asymmetry, the damage, the wrong trim. The bomber tried to turn again. Mason shook Loi, slapped his face. No response. Seraphine rushed forward. Together they held Loi upright. The navigator cracked a smelling salt ampoule and shoved it under Loi's nose. Loi gasped, coughed, found the controls. The aircraft steadied. 2,600 feet. 8 miles to the coast. Loi forced himself to focus. Peripheral vision gone, just a tunnel straight ahead. Attitude indicator. Altimeter. Nothing else mattered. At 16:23, the Dutch coast passed beneath them. Sand. Dunes. Then water. The North Sea. Cold. Gray. Unforgiving. They were still burning. 2,400 feet. Loi ran the numbers. If the last engines quit, they had maybe 10 miles of glide, not enough to reach England. They needed power all the way across. Fuel gauges wavered, near empty. Mason called out numbers. 50 gallons. 40. Loi couldn't feel his left arm anymore. Couldn't feel his leg. He flew by instruments and stubbornness alone. At 16:47, the English coast appeared through the haze. Essex or Suffolk, he didn't know which. Didn't care. Home. 20 minutes away. Then, at 16:51, the number 1 engine, outboard left, quit. Fuel exhausted. The propeller windmilled violently. Loi reached for the emergency pneumatic feathering system. One chance. He hit the switch. Compressed air hissed. The blades rotated. The propeller feathered. Minimum drag. Now they had one engine left. Number 4. Outboard right. The engine that had been dying for over an hour. The aircraft had left violently. Loi slammed right rudder. His leg wouldn't move. Seraphine grabbed Loi's leg and pulled it off the pedal. Loi shifted his weight, braced his body, and forced the rudder over. The aircraft straightened, barely. 1,800 feet. 20 miles offshore. One engine burning. The fire on number 3 still raged. Flames wrapped around the wing root. Aluminum glowed dull orange. Mason stared at the fuel gauge. 30 gallons. 20. 15. The engine coughed. Recovered. Kept running. The English coast slid beneath them at 1703. 1,400 feet. One engine. One chance. Loi aimed for the first flat ground he could see. No navigation. No runway selection. Just survival. A small airfield appeared ahead, grass strips, fighter base. Red Hill or Surrey, maybe. Long enough. If the engine lasted 30 more seconds. The fire still burned. The wing creaked. The metal was weakening. But the engine held. For now, the fire was no longer just a threat. It was a countdown. If Lieutenant William Loi did not get the bomber on the ground in the next 60 seconds, everyone aboard would die. He lined cabin in the sky up with the grass runway at RAF Red Hill. Altitude, 1,000 feet. Airspeed, barely controllable. Engines, one running, one burning. The number 3 engine was fully engulfed now. Flames wrapped around the wing root, crawling toward the fuselage. The aluminum skin glowed dull orange. Loi could not judge the approach properly. His vision was blurred, depth perception unreliable. He aimed for the strip of green ahead and hoped it was long enough. The landing gear was the next problem. No hydraulics. No normal extension. Only the emergency hand crank. Mason found it and started turning. 200 rotations. His arms burned as he cranked as fast as he could. The mechanism moved slowly, metal grinding against metal. 800 feet. Loi reduced power on the last engine. The descent steepened too much. He eased the throttle forward again. The engine coughed. Caught. Kept running. On fumes and willpower alone. Mason kept cranking. 50 turns. 75. 100. The indicator lights were dead. Electrical power was gone. There was no way to confirm whether the gear was down and locked. They had to trust the mechanism. 600 feet. The runway was close now. A small fighter base. Grass field, barely 4,000 feet long. Too short for a B-17 under normal conditions. They had no normal conditions left. Mason finished the crank. 198. 199. 200. The gear should be down. There was no way to know. He moved forward to brace with Seraphine. For 100 feet. The fire on number 3 flared violently. A fuel line failed. Fresh fuel fed the flames. The wing glowed brighter. The structure began to deform. Loi could feel it through the controls, the wing flexing, wanting to give way. Seraphine shouted to the crew. Brace for landing. Men strapped down the wounded. Grabbed whatever they could. Dempsey, Koboretsky, Braswell, all of them waiting in silence. 200 feet. Loi pulled the throttle back. The descent increased. He couldn't flare properly. Needed 2 hands. Needed strength. Needed depth perception. He had none of those. Only his left hand. Only his resolve. 100 feet. The stall warning buffet began. 70 miles per hour. 65. Right at the edge. The aircraft wanted to drop a wing. Wanted to stall. Wanted to tear itself apart. Loi held it level. 50 feet. The fire was everywhere now. Flames licked along the fuselage. The wing could fail at any moment. Loi did not look at it. He looked at the runway. 20 feet. The main landing gear struck first. Grass tore beneath the wheels. The bomber decelerated brutally. Loi held the control column back, keeping the tail up as long as he could. No brakes. No hydraulics. Only rolling friction and ground drag. The tail dropped. The aircraft bounced once. Then again. Then rolled, shuddering, smoke pouring from the burning wing. Cabin in the sky came to a stop after nearly 3,000 feet. They were on the ground. In England. Alive. The fire was still burning. Mason opened the top escape hatch. Seraphine forced the side door. The crew began evacuating immediately. The wounded came out first. Dempsey, Koboretsky, Braswell. One by one, they moved fast. The fuel tanks could ignite at any second. Loi was still in the left seat. His hand was locked around the control column. The muscles had seized so hard he could not release them. Mason pried his fingers open one by one and pulled him free. They cleared the aircraft. 10 men out. 8 wounded. 1 dead. Murphy remained in the right seat. They carried the wounded 200 yards away and turned back. Cabin in the sky sat alone on the grass. Wing burning. Smoke rising. But intact. She had brought them home. 4 hours and 26 minutes from Leipzig to England. One-handed. On fire. With 8 men aboard who would have died if Loi had abandoned the aircraft. Fire crews arrived at 17:08. Foam cannons. Water hoses. They fought the flames and saved what they could. B-17 to 38,109 would never fly again. 3 days later, she was salvaged. Loi stood on the grass, face bandaged, right arm useless, left arm trembling. He watched medics tend his crew as the sun set over England. They were home. All of them. 6 months later, Lieutenant General Karl Spatz placed the Medal of Honor around Loi's neck. Not for destroying enemy aircraft, not for completing the mission, but for refusing to leave 2 wounded men behind. For flying a crippled bomber one-handed through enemy airspace. For bringing his crew home when every calculation said it was impossible. That is what command looks like. That is what courage costs. And that is why William Loi deserves to be remembered.